I reread Opening Minds.
It was a bad mistake.
Yes, very bad mistake, very bad. And then I read Frank Dicotta's Cultural Revolution. That was interesting, if a little confusing.
And are you going to culturally revolt?
Yeah, I'm going to have to. I've had enough of culture. I need to get rid of it.
It's pretty tedious stuff, isn't it? And just handed out like pap all over the place.
Yeah.
So what's the Cultural Revolution? What's he talking about?
The period in Chinese history between 1966 and 1976, when culture was essentially ploughed asunder by the Chinese. They've totally wiped out most culture, songs, music, movies, even playing games. The only thing people had left was cards, and that was supposed to have been outlawed.
And they had their fun by killing their teachers or burying them alive and beheading them.
Yeah. Upwards of 1 million people were murdered in these struggle sessions.
So, I mean, I had a look. You sent me some links on the Jung Chang and John Halliday's Mao.
Yeah.
And I followed those through and looked at some of the criticism by academics of their work. And there's a book called Was Mao a Monster? And one of the reviewers, a very astute human being, said, yes.
Yeah. Of course it was.
I was fascinated by what I could see of the criticism, which all of it seemed to be generalized. There didn't seem to be we're getting down into this detail. So it is a difficult area, but certainly his acceptance of the Red Guard and the idea that you should, that he scrambles his way back into power and then ditches his fourth wife, along with the several thousand women that he had transmitted sexual diseases to, which perhaps the people who don't think he was a monster are unwilling to accept. That's what an incredible series of events. And I mean, it leads me, I've got this one thing that really bothers me, that I'm dealing to some extent with people who are Russophobic, and they've got this idea that the Russians are doing this to us. And you're going, no, it's Putin's government that are doing it. And the same in China, that it's not the Chinese people who are doing these things. Chinese people are lovely.
Yeah, it's Xi Jinping and his gang.
Exactly. And it's been, a gang of one, a gang of four, gangs of several numbers for such a long time. It was put forward that somebody, in fact, in supporting Jung Chang and Halliday's book, said that if you looked at what happened under Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan, it would appear that he would have been a much better leader than Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
Because he had less of a tendency to torture and murder people. Well,
Frank Dicotta makes that case with his book, The Tragedy of Liberation.
Yeah. But when Elon Musk has broken the firewall of China and people have ready access to the internet, who knows what is going to happen there?
Yeah.
And I've certainly picked up the notion that, the what I'm doing is anti-authoritarian, but I suddenly went, well, actually, what's what in Hong Kong is called pro-democracy.
Yes.
And that's pretty much what I represent, that people should be allowed to have something to say.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my topic du jour. Over the last couple of weeks, I was approached by a guy in Melbourne called Andy Nolch. And he said he was an independent Scientologist who'd been involved, I think, for 6 years in the Mother cult, the group that some people call a church because they've not looked up the word church in a dictionary. It's a misunderstood word, meaning a Christian congregation, of course. And he said he'd basically written this thing. He's run a podcast, and he was wanting to leave. He was done with it now. He was done with Scientology, and he wanted to do his final interview with the legendary John Atack. He didn't use the word legendary, and he thought my name was Attack, and he was most disappointed to find out it isn't. And foolishly, perhaps, I didn't put his name into a search engine, into a DuckDuckGo, as we call it in the trade. I didn't DuckDuckGo him. God, where did they come up with that name? We had 3 long conversations, each more than 2 hours, which we both recorded. And for me, the opportunity, I've talked with hundreds of people who are on their way out of Scientology and at different stages. And you can't sit down with somebody and say, right, I'm going to record this conversation. Let's see where we go. Because it just doesn't feel ethically proper somehow. Or conducive to a free and easy conversation. So I'm very busy, and I kind of didn't want to do it because I'm busy, and then sort of thought, no, this is an opportunity I shouldn't put aside, because he wants to record it. It's coming from him. And the conversations were elaborate. They were not at all unusual. I'm very used to people fixating on certain ideas within Scientology. In his case, he is strongly of the belief that Scientology is an intelligence operation, probably backed by the CIA, and that L. Ron Hubbard was really a member of US Navy intelligence during World War II.
Absurd, but interesting.
Yes. And it proved impossible to shift this notion, telling him, I really have gone through the documents, the 800 pages of Hubbard's Navy file, his Veterans Administration file as well. And his file is absolutely consistent with witnesses. So, for example, when he had his 55-hour battle with a magnetic deposit 12 miles off Cape Lookout in Oregon, claimed to have sunk not 1, but 2 Japanese submarines, that his second in command, Thomas Moulton, testified in 1984 during the Armstrong case. So we have a witness who was there. We also have the reports that are in the Navy file where Hubbard is admonished not only for wasting 55 hours, all his depth charges, and bringing in blimps and another vessel into this absurd situation. He is also, of course, admonished for having then sailed down the California coast and attacked the Mexican Los Coronados Island, which thankfully was uninhabited when he shelled it. And as Russell Miller points out, why would you make a false file, to conceal his intelligence work that was so hostile towards him, that's so negative? Also pointed out that in the affirmations or admissions written 47, 48, somewhere around there, he mentions Admiral Braisted, who's the man who wrote the admonition. So the evidence is so consistent, there's so much of it, but the desire to believe is so powerful that I couldn't get through it. But before I broadcast anything, and we still haven't put anything up yet, we may have done by the time we put this up, you never know, because time doesn't work in a linear fashion on YouTube. But which is why I wanted to talk to you about it, because you're the person I think that I most want to talk about this to, knowing each other as well as we do, and understanding your consistent ethical position throughout the, what is it now, for 25 years that we've known each other.
I've been consistently unethical.
Yes, you're the only person I know who, when they answered the phone, would say, "Hello, Satan," Prince of Darkness. At least you're honest about it. But you're somebody who's thought about, ethical and political issues for whatever reason. I've never really understood. And it was put to me. Andy Knowles decided to broadcast one of these things early. We actually agreed to go on the same day, and he put one up 2 days early, which is fine. He didn't get much in the way of comments. I had a quick look, and somebody had said they managed 2 minutes of listening to these two type threes talking to each other, which for the uninitiated is Scientology's term for people who are totally insane. And I'm interested that somebody would have that perception of me after 2 minutes, and I'd very much like to hear from that person and talk to them and see what their definition of madness is. But I somehow doubt that I'll be hearing from them. So the first thing was I got an email from a dear friend and colleague who had been told that this thing had gone up, and he said, "Do you know what he was in prison for?" It's kind of email that friends send to each other, and I didn't know what he was in prison for because, as I said, I'd done no research. But went off and found out that Andy Knowles, who lives in Melbourne, and I learned how to pronounce the name of that place. In England, there's a place called Melbourne. But I was laughed at when I went to St. Hill because the guy who was running the OT3 secret level course was from Melbourne.
Yeah.
And he taught me to say Melbourne. So it's very precise. It's like having a dialogue coach in a movie, all that time that Dominic West had to spend learning to say snard instead of snot in the first line of The Wire. Took him a whole day, apparently. So anyway, I discovered that this is what happened. A few years ago, a young stand-up comedian called Eurydice Dixon was attacked and murdered in Melbourne. And a memorial was held, a public memorial, not the family memorial. And it was to be held in a public place. And as a protest of men's rights, Andy Knowles, who himself had done a little bit of time on the stage under the name Space Cowboy, he painted, I think if I've got the dimensions right, a penis on the grass that was about 10 yards. It was quite large. He said he didn't have much time. He needed to do something. And it reminded me of the symbol that you gave me many years ago when you were with 1 Minute Silence. You gave me a huge Avedis Zildjian symbol, which I must give back to you at some point because it's probably worth about 400 quid. But you had patiently knobbed it because at that time, intellectually, the band were going around and drawing knobs on everything.
We knobbed the entirety of Copenhagen one night.
Yeah, and they've never been able to get rid of it, and people don't go there anymore because they're sort of shamed. What can I say? Very grown up. So he knobbed the grass, and they put tarpaulins over it before the memorial, but they arrested him. I think he actually handed himself in.
Yeah.
He tells me he did apologize to the family because he'd not meant to offend them. He went before a judge, and the judge said, right, only obviously in an Australian accent, 200 hours of community service and quite an enormous fine. Apparently replacing grass in Melbourne costs tens of thousands of dollars because the grass seed is like $1 a seed or something. They wanted to make an example of him, and I can understand that, I really can. His idea was it was a bunch of ultra feminists who were hijacking this death to protest that men are all evil. That was the idea, if I've understood it, that he seemed to have. And quite a lot of men are evil, actually, when you come down to it. But
especially the ones with penises.
yes, and the ones without, they can be quite dangerous as well if you study the history of the Ottoman Empire.
It's all true.
But there we go. He tells me he did 175 hours of his 200 hours of community service. Along the way, he's busted for importing a substance called hermine, which I'd never heard of. And it's apparently something that people who are going to use ayahuasca use so that they won't get quite as bad a gripes with their innards as is usual. Not a substance I've ever taken. David Icke, of course, saw transdimensional lizards when he took ayahuasca, and that was our royal family, apparently. And they were 12 feet tall. But they seem to live a long time, don't they? Our royal family. So maybe they are lizards. But lizards actually have much shorter lives than human beings, don't they?
Yes.
I'm confused.
Although I would imagine that if you're a tortoise-style lizard, then you'll live a lot longer. Yeah.
And when Prince Philip sheds his tail, is he able to regrow it?
He is, actually. Many times. He's regrown it more than 7 times so far.
That's what comes of being a Danish Greek, I suppose. And, a Battenberg, having to change your name from a type of cake with pink and yellow squares in it to Mountbatten, so people won't ridicule you about how many times you shed your tail. This is not getting any easier, is it? So anyway, he apparently in Australia you're allowed to import a certain amount of hermine, but he'd gone to I think 7 times how much you're allowed to import. And he also decided he was going to leave the country twice while he was doing community service, and you're not meant to. So he got nabbed for having left the country twice. The hermine charge was hanging over him as a distribution charge, but it was just a charge. And the judge decided that the best thing in this circumstance was to send him to prison for 5 months.
Oh, crikey.
Which does seem a little bit extreme.
Yeah.
I think, what I'd say is that I think what he did was silly. Childish even, I'm going to venture. But when you did it in Copenhagen, it was very grown up.
It was incredibly grown up. I stand by my actions.
Stand by your knob.
Partly because when we went into the advanced organization St. Hill in Copenhagen, we had our marker pens with us. And
right by chance.
And one of us, I'm not going to say which of us it was sitting in a chair and challenging the OT5 who was there to see around corners, essentially. Is it true that you're telepathic? Well, yes, I've got a lot more awareness than normal people have who haven't done these courses. So one of us thought we would test out their telepathy by drawing knobs all the way around the chair on the parquet floor. So there was this chair and it was completely ringed with knobs. And I stand by that. I think that was a fine thing to do.
Yes.
It wasn't me.
And so in fact, we'd guessed that. We'd guessed that. Some of us. So the criminal charges are pending. So the proof was really that the person was not telepathic, but they were telepathetic.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
their defense in law.
So he goes to prison, he does this stuff, and the next email I get when I've said, yes, I've looked up what it is he did, said he is a neo-Nazi and a misogynist. So I thought, oh dear.
Okay.
I better talk with Andy about this really before I figure these things out. And so last night I had another 2-hour conversation with him, and he's still adamant that the CIA and Fletcher Prouty and all of this, and I'm kind of going, have you read my book? And I should have asked this question before, and he said no.
Yeah.
Have you read Russell Miller's book? No.
Oh, there you go.
What primary sources have you looked at? So we got into some detail, and he told me that, he thought the Swiss democratic system was the best system. So, because I first of all wanted to see if he was a neo-Nazi. I'd just like to point out that Nazis are people who do not believe in democracy.
Yeah.
And in America at the moment, you've got this very peculiar situation where there are people who call themselves neo-Nazis who actually would have been considered racially impure by Hitler, because even though they have pale skin, they might be Polish or Ukrainian or French or anything that's
Slavic.
Yeah. Anything Slavic, definitely out. Scandinavian, British. I don't know why the Scots qualify, but they do. Welsh is fine too. We're all Aryans apparently, and the Japanese, according to Hitler's.
Which is a bit weird, but
brilliant.
Well done, Hitler.
All of those blonde, blue-eyed Japanese people are also Aryans. But so a lot of the neo-Nazis. The other thing which a friend of mine points out is that who is their Führer? Because if they're Nazis, they can't just. They need a Führer. They need somebody to tell them what to do. And Hitler, even if he is, as the National Enquirer says, living on the moon, isn't actually issuing any orders, as far as I can tell.
David Duke is.
David Duke, yeah, that would be.
So he's probably Hitler.
Yes, he probably is. Actually, I hadn't really thought about it that way. So, I'm in this situation, and I'm thinking, oh, we're okay. He believes in democracy, but when I say neo-Nazi, he says, oh, well, I can see why some people might think, and he calls himself right-wing.
Right.
And what have wings got to do with any of this, frankly? It's like the Scientology telepathic person not being able to see round corners. You need a left wing and a right wing if you're going to fly.
Yeah.
All of these one-winged political parties,
No wonder no politicians are able to fly.
Yeah. Or see round corners.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, let's ask about the Holocaust, because you have to, don't you? And he said that he thought the numbers were exaggerated.
Of course.
And
there's the neo-Nazi thing.
Yeah, well, he was quite triumphant when I said, well, yes, when it said that 6 million Jews died in the camps, that's probably not true. And he seemed quite exultant at that thought. He said, however, 6 million Jews probably did die if you include the Babi Yar massacre and that happened in Belarus. They didn't die in the camps, but they did die. And he got
Professor Timothy Snyder, who writes in his book Bloodlands, the majority of the killings in the Holocaust were the Holocaust of bullets, people being shot into pits.
Yes,
that's the vast majority. We're looking at maybe 2 million who died in the camps.
Yeah.
And the rest were all killed where they were. The idea that people were taken in cattle cars to Auschwitz-Birkenau, that happened, but it only happened with a minority of Jews. Most of them were shot where they were, along with 3 million Poles, along with millions of Slavs. So, we're talking about far in excess of 6 million, and not necessarily killed in camps.
No, and hundreds of thousands of Romanis, blacks, homosexuals, all sorts of classes. So, the position it's put me in is that I do not believe in the cancel culture.
Sure.
If there was anything in what had been said which was inciting people to hate other people, then I would say, no, I'm not going to broadcast this. But he didn't say anything of that type at all. And we talked for in excess of 10 hours. And it seemed to me that the right approach, if David Miscavige, for example, wanted to have a conversation with me and promised not to hit me or spit at me or shout at me, then I'd be perfectly willing to do that.
Yeah.
Even though I do have a very low opinion of David Miscavige from the accounts I have from people I've interviewed who worked with him. But if there was some way of redeeming him, some way of, getting him to think better, then to me, that's part of my culture.
Yeah.
And once somebody has, reformed and changed their behavior and made some demonstration of that, then, they've become a pro-social, life-affirming citizen. I'm not sure, because Andy came to the first interview having said, this will be my last interview and I'm leaving it all. He announced that he was still a 50% Scientologist.
Yeah.
That he knew that the OT levels, which are meant to afford you supernatural powers, don't work. He knew that there was no such thing as a clear. He knew that the release levels don't work. But right up to the last, he was saying he wants to have more auditing, more counselling. And I sort of put it to him, having understood that Ron Hubbard was a malignant narcissist who simply enslaved people for his own amusement and safety, that it does seem to me rather ridiculous to believe that he developed a technology of mind that would save humanity, for which there is no evidence. That all that seems to happen is that people have moments of euphoria, very good indicators, as they call it, wins, where they feel high, and that cocaine is a lot cheaper and a lot less dangerous. And having said that, cocaine is very expensive and very dangerous, but Scientology is more expensive, $500,000, for a go, and more dangerous because you get auditing junkies, you get people who will give up their families, who will stop talking to their own children, which to me is an unbelievable idea, who will go into bankruptcy, who will become terminally ill and not take proper medical advice. Seems to me, cocaine might be a good thing in comparison.
Yeah, comparison.
Lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
So give me some thoughts upon
cancel culture. I don't believe in cancel culture. I believe in consequence culture.
Yeah.
So somebody like Kevin Spacey, for example, after having been found out as a sexual predator, now finds it difficult to get work. That's a consequence. He hasn't been cancelled, he's been consequenced.
Has he actually been found guilty of anything yet?
I don't know.
Because the only case I heard about, he was acquitted.
Right.
And I quite by chance, I met somebody who's been around him, who's known him, who actually said he was a rotten human being. He really didn't like him. But it does put us in a strange situation that one of the truly great actors of the generation, there's no doubt about that, should be in this situation. I mean, Fatty Arbuckle had some problems as well in the acting trade, and he was found guilty of molesting children. Whereas what's being suggested with Kevin Spacey was that he was a little too pushy. He's a gay man. He was a little too pushy with a younger man who, when the younger man said, "Get off me," he did get off him.
Yeah.
It was the original charge. And it was the young man's mother, 3 years after the event, I believe, who brought the charge. So let's move over to, say, Harvey Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein,
or Jeffrey Epstein, people who we can be absolutely confident did do something. And, I mean, Johnny Depp lost contracts because of this strange libel case.
It's interesting that half of the population think that he's actually not guilty of anything, and the other half believes that he is. There's a really interesting divide, the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp camps.
Yeah. And
I
I mean,
find that really interesting.
he's not been convicted of an offence. He sued her for libel and
For
lost.
libel, and lost the libel case, yeah.
But yeah,
He's the son.
And there he is. And again, a remarkable actor, though I'm not a fan of Pirates of the Caribbean, I must say. Yeah.
You're not into Keith Richards then?
Oh, well, yeah, true, actually. Now you come to mention it, yeah. Blokes with trout flies in their hair. What a role model. I watched The Libertine the other day, which I haven't seen before.
Yeah.
My partner's a fan of the Earl of Rochester's poetry. And I can't say that I am, because it is truly pornographic. I mean, that is it is writings about harlots, which is what pornos graphos means.
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised his nose fell off, frankly.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a way to live, but maybe I'm wrong. You know, maybe promiscuity is a really good pro-social thing to do. And Robert Hare and others who've written about psychopathic personality are incorrect in saying that casual sexual liaisons are a bad idea.
Yeah.
Could just be me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, cancel culture and the thing of, you know, a university where the students won't allow somebody like David Duke, or that I can understand that, or Richard Spencer, or Jordan Peterson, or Stefan Molyneux, or let's get a whole hate list out here. They won't allow them to talk, rather than having the chance to heckle them.
Yeah,
it would be much more fun.
There was that video clip of Katie Hopkins, who turned up at one of the universities to give a speech, and almost everybody in the audience walked out before she started, which I thought was wonderful. They didn't deplatform her, they just left. Said, we're not interested. That was a good consequence. Yeah.
I mean, I can remember a situation some years ago, many long years ago, being a very old person as I am now, where a guy told me that he'd not talked with his sister for, I think it was 2 years, because she was a druggie.
Right.
And I said, oh, what's the drug? Thinking, you know, heroin, cocaine, maybe speed, something like that. And he said cannabis.
Oh, right, she's a druggie. Oh, dear.
So I sat down and not talked to his own sister for 2 years. And we're in the bar of a hotel, a little hotel down in Cornwall. Lovely place, Talon Bay. Absolutely recommend it. And it's quite late at night. They're just the two of us. It's a tiny little room. And while we're talking, I wasn't drinking alcohol at all at that time. I had about 10 years where I didn't, because it upset my digestion. It doesn't anymore, I'm happy to say, but I still don't drink very often. Don't seem to enjoy it as much as I did when I was a youngster.
Interesting, that.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe Saturday night I might have as many as 2 glasses of wine, but that's me done now. Age, infirmity, what can I say? But my digestion's healthy now because, you know, you and I share, sadly, the same condition in that we're not keen on gluten. And it's been, 17 years now since I last knowingly took anything with gluten. And
crikey,
I'm very lucky in that I've recovered, having had a lifetime, you know. And isn't it silly to be able to say at age 65 that you're more healthy than you were at age 35? But
yeah,
I just feel so incredibly lucky. But anyway, I had some orange juice and he had 5 single malt whiskies because he was trying the different single malt whiskies.
And he's concerned about a druggie.
Yeah. So I said to him, one of the things that people often confuse is the difference between a hard and a soft drug. But a hard drug is an addictive drug, and a soft drug is a non-addictive drug. And despite certain rumors to the contrary, cannabis is a soft drug because you don't get withdrawal symptoms if you stop using it. And having known hundreds of cannabis users. When they run out, they kind of go, oh, I wish I could get some. Not, not that kind of thing. It's not like train spotting,
You're not going to go and sleep with a trucker for 20 quid because you haven't got any cannabis.
I'm not. You're so, how did you know that? So I happen to say, so for example, coffee contains caffeine, which is a hard drug. It's addictive. If you stop drinking coffee, you'll get headaches. That's the standard thing. And this voice came from behind the bar. And I didn't even realize the bar woman was still there. And she said, oh, that's so strange. My husband stopped drinking coffee last week and he's had a terrible headache all week. And but it seemed to me that although I thought the notion of not talking to somebody of your own blood, because they have either a criminal tendency or a health problem, or however one would construe it, that I could have just said, I'm not talking to you because you're stupid, or you're beneath me, or I'm superior to you, or you're gullible, or there are all sorts of words that could have been used, but he wasn't. He was a smart bloke. Quite liked him. And he'd made this odd decision. What I'm really glad about is that the next day he phoned his sister.
Yeah.
And
good.
So if there are any neo-Nazis here who haven't talked to their sisters, then get on the phone,
Yeah.
The same is true for survivors of the Cultural Revolution and any other topic that we've talked about, I think.
Yeah, phone your sister.
Phone your sister. And if you haven't got a sister, adopt one.
Adopt one immediately.
Yeah.
And then phone her.
Yeah. Oh, the world would be a better place, wouldn't it? People phone their sisters.
Yeah, it would.
And that brings us to, I think, the notion of fervor. How passionately people believe things that...
Yeah.
One of the things we say about members of cult groups, or one of the things I hear frequently said about members of cult, they have black and white thinking. Things are either yes or no. No 50 shades of grey. I always make that joke. It wasn't funny the first time, frankly, but it's seen in this way. And then I find people in the ex-cult world having the same kind of black and white thinking.
Yeah.
It's okay as long as you're not a member of a cult group to have black and white thinking.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of a fundamental thought, which to me is, I do believe that there are evil people in the world. I really do. I've met several of them. And I don't think there are many of them. I think Robert Hare, the king of all the psychologists who talk about psychopaths, he reckons about 2% of people, 3% of men, 1% of women. So that's another thing where women are unfavorably treated. They should be more female psychopaths, obviously, because they're represented in the psychopathic community. It's made up for in the borderline personality, probably, where there are less men and more women. So there is an equal distribution going on somewhere. I think we get into a huge problem when we start then talking about the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath, which Robert Hare in his Without Conscience in the early 90s, he says a psychopath is a word used by those of us who believe that this is something that is inherent, that's innate, inborn, whereas a sociopath is a term used by people who believe that it's socially conditioned or the pressure environment. By 2003, is it, when he co-writes Snakes in Suits, he's saying a psychopath is somebody who scores more than 30 of the 40 points possible on the Hare Psychopathy Checklist Revised. A sociopath is somebody who scores from 4 to 30 on the scale.
Right. Yeah.
I can't say that I'm completely convinced by the scale itself. The
No.
questions asked do seem to be a bit weighted, but the idea of having like the criminal psychopath as one thing and the sociopathic behavior as something else, but that would also include the narcissistic personality disorder,
Yeah.
Machiavellian disorder, and the dark end, the dark triad, the dark end of the borderline. And which is why I came to this point of talking about people being human predators rather than trying to define them in any kind of psychiatric.
Yeah, it makes more sense to talk about behavior than it does to talk about what people are. Especially when you've got a question about nature versus nurture.
Yeah. And yeah, what's the effect that they're going to have on us?
Yeah. How do they behave?
Which again could lead us into it surprises me. It's 4 or 5 years since I first published work using the term human predator and saying, I think that the first thing that we should teach all of our children is that there are human predators. They've been very definitely identified. Kent Keel's work, Hare's student, the Psychopath Whisperer, his book is called.
Yeah.
Why he'd be whispering to psychopaths, I don't know. And
the psychopath shouter.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, is this meant to be like horse whisperers, people who can calm psychopaths down by stroking their manes or something?
Yeah.
But he went into prisons, and have you read Keel?
No, I haven't. No.
He went into prisons with an fMRI machine and tested criminal psychopaths. That's a full term. People who had done very horrible things, and you know, scored above 30 on the checklist. And he felt that the fMRI was not adequate, and so he went to Siemens, who built it, and he worked with them to make a machine that is held to be 20 times magnified over the machine he was originally using. And he tried to get psychopaths to come along and be tested, and nobody came. Hey, are you a psychopath? I'll give you $10. And so he had to go back to prisons again. So he had a mobile fMRI built, and I think he tested more than 500 people, all of them guilty of significant criminal acts, and found that they have a deficiency in the connection between the so-called old brain, which in a human being is the same as it is in a crocodile, or in fact a lizard, now come to mention it.
Yeah.
We can't regrow our tails, well, not all of us. And that the limbic system, which is kind of donutty bit, which has got what you call the almonds, or when we translate that into proper medical terms, the amygdala.
Yeah.
Just got a walnut in your brain as well. It's brain science. The bit that connects the fast reaction, old brain aggressive stuff with the prefrontal cortex, where the clever stuff's meant to happen, the primate brain, which only primates have, the paralimbic system, it's called, is deficient in these people.
Yeah.
And it's deficient every time. So you do have a physiological reason, which we have to be very careful about, because that could be made a justification for irresponsible behavior.
Yeah.
And under our present ideas of law, which go back to Henry II and beyond, if you cannot be held accountable for your behavior, then you haven't committed a crime. In Latin, it's mens rea and actus reus. So the actus reus is the act of the crime, but if you didn't have the mens rea, the intention, the ability to form intentions, then you're not guilty of a crime. We got this with Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, that who has a couple of years ago was declared sane, and which is an amazing thought. That bloke was 7 women he bashed with a hammer,
After
he's
being
now,
told to by God.
I'm sorry?
After being told to by God.
Yes, after being told to by God. And at that point, apparently, when he heard God, he wasn't sane, but now he is. But as I remember it, the judge who sentenced him basically said, because the point is that if he could be cured, then they'd have to let him out of Broadmoor because he would no longer be.
Yeah, it's a hospital.
Yeah, for the criminally insane and Jimmy Savile. And the judge, I believe, made a ruling that violates statute law in saying, I don't care if anybody decides this man is sane, he's got to be banged away for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And I must say, I agree with him.
Yeah.
On that particular point. And I'm very concerned about this idea of evading responsibility because you have brain damage or you ate too many Hershey bars, I think, in the Harvey Milk case. That there should be mitigation. But people who are dangerous to society, as we found with, say, Mark Chapman, who'd said he was going to kill John Lennon and was not believed by psychiatrists, that such people should probably be sequestered from society.
Yeah.
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 For the sake of society.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that we have to rescind all of their human rights. It's just the right of freedom that we rescind.
Yeah.
Give them nice food and, let them watch telly.
Yeah.
And hang out with their friends,
And put a little mask on them so they don't bite your nose off if they're Hannibal Lecter, But that is something that really does profoundly concern me, the contempt towards people who are held to have, done atrocious and terrible things. That I think it saps our humanity if we don't treat those people as well as we can. So prisons should be like Scandinavian prisons.
Yeah.
And, you want to stop them from performing harm. The notion of punishment seems to me outmoded.
It's wild. The idea of punishment is just wild. It posits that people can't alter their own behavior.
There is no free will. We are trapped within this thing. So I think Kent Keel, the other idea is that there are 3 genetic alleles which are associated with psychopathy. I am a lot more skeptical of anything that talks about DNA and genetics because the complexity of interaction is so profound. It's like, for years we were being told there was junk DNA. So all this DNA that we've got is junk. And then somebody figured it can be switched. It can turn back on again.
Yeah.
So, an example is that infants metabolize vitamin K, which is found in broccoli, along with a level of nitrates, which is as high as the level of nitrates in bacon, apparently. So broccoli may not be a total health food. It's the most popular vegetable in Britain, though. So, I don't want to be sued by the Association of Broccoli Growers. Do go and check this information. But vitamin K is given to newborn babies in this country just in case they can't produce it. And as a baby, you need it. And there are all sorts of things that you need, and the DNA will switch off unless you're unlucky, in which case your baby DNA will keep on going and you'll get stuff you don't need. So I think we're still at we're in the usual state of human beings, which is we think we know almost everything now, whereas in fact, as Socrates pointed out, we don't know very much at all.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that there appear to be genetic reasons for people being horrible and predatory, but there are also environmental reasons that studies have shown that you can change the behavior, particularly of young people who have the callous and unemotional disorder. The Montaka study, I think it's called, which was a juvenile detention center where they had a control group and they had kids who were basically love bombed. You know, they were treated nicely and fairly and stuff, and they didn't murder anybody after they left, whereas the control group did, which is a pretty interesting thought and one we need to go further with. But so there should be such a concept as redemption.
Yeah, I think there is. I think there is. There was all of the Furman versus Georgia criminals. When they were released, they didn't create what we would expect to be the number of murders. They didn't perpetrate those kinds of crimes. The Furman versus Georgia ruling was that which overturned the death penalty in the United States between 1972 and 1977.
Yep.
So all of those reprieved inmates were then set free later on in life. Not all of them, lots of them were set free later on in life, and they tended to live out ordinary lives. I think one of the lessons that we get from that is the idea that if somebody has murdered somebody, it's going to act as a very strong deterrent for them murdering anybody else, because their conscience does them in. We saw something like 100,000 American servicemen who'd fought in Vietnam kill themselves when they returned home. And that, again, would seem to be conscience doing you in.
Almost twice the mortality rate of soldiers fighting in Vietnam, American soldiers fighting in Vietnam.
It's about 50,000 to 100.
Yeah.
So, I think that it when we do a really heinous thing, conscience steps in and says you need to alter the way you operate, unless, of course, we're a human predator.
And we then, in fact, actually, let me I'm going to take a bathroom break, if that's all right with you, Ed.
Yes, I shall be here.
Oh, good.
In this position.
Do not forsake me, oh my darling.
But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk shit about John while he's away.
Yeah, you think you can get away with it, Ed?
This is what I'm reading. Europe's Inner Demons by Norman Cohn. Just up to the bit where the Knights Templars are all wiped out. Interesting.
What was about Europe's Inner Demons?
Yes, that's what I'm reading at the moment.
So he's one of my absolute heroes, Cohn.
Yeah, it's great.
Pursuit of the Millennium, I read it about 2 years before I got out of Scientology, and it really set me thinking. And I read Europe's Inner Demons after that, Warrant for Genocide, about the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And is it Noah's Flood?
Yes.
Have you read that? That's about the changing attitudes among scientists as Lyell's work, and how they fought to protect the idea of the flood, with ever increasingly odd arguments, which is a great thing to understand how we do in fact defend our ideas. And there was something else he wrote which I read along the Christ, I've read a lot of his books.
Chaos and the World to Come.
Yes, Chaos, Cosmos and the World to Come, something like
That's
that.
The one. Yeah,
which was also brilliant. I tried to get a friend of mine to read Warrant for Genocide because he's anti-Semitic and believes in the Zionist organized government and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And he said, "Oh no, he's Jewish." Okay, and then when he found that he worked in British intelligence during World War II, that was the end of it. You mustn't think of such a man. And seeing what a compassionate and profound man he is, or was. I've read critiques of his work too, because you want to see what else is going on, and I wasn't very impressed.
Yeah.
His great historians are just a wonder and a marvel. What can I say? Lovely people.
Yes, indeed.
Oh. So yeah, I was surprised that in all these years, nobody has said to me, John, you're Human Predator. This is Ron Hubbard's suppressive person, isn't it? And the answer is no.
No.
So there we go.
No, because a suppressive person is by definition an anti-Scientologist. He's not an anti-human.
But isn't it interesting the way that he uses a psychiatric term, antisocial personality?
Yeah.
That
he seems to have stolen from Cleckley.
Exactly. It's The Mask of Sanity by Cleckley, that he's taken a few of Cleckley's points and swelled them out with things like, these people will criticize Ron Hubbard. It's a major point of the antisocial personality. Oh dear. And Cleckley's kind of weird because he's not only the guy who really brings us, the word psychopath had been around since I think the 1840s. And there's work on it at the end of World War One when they found a lot of malingerers in the hospitals where there's nothing wrong with them except they were psychopaths. They're kind of going, I don't want to be shot, for some reason. Yeah. Cowards. But
that would have been me for sure.
Yeah, well, I don't think I'd like to have been shot much, because I had two great uncles who were both copter blighty in World War One. One of them was missing a hand. I'm not suggesting it was done deliberately. They were injured in combat. And the other was missing a little bit of, I think it was the calf of his left leg.
Yeah.
And I mean, he did have these attachments he'd got that he could put on his hand, one for the lawnmower and what have you. And when you're a 7-year-old and you see that, that's quite attractive.
That is amazing.
But I think I'd rather have my hand. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I would have been a very, very conscientious objector.
I used to know a guy who had one hand who was able to roll cigarettes with his fake hand and his real hand. And he was very clever.
Bob Rosenstein, who was my landlord when I first went to East Grinstead in 1975, he could drive while rolling a cigarette with the other hand.
My dad used to be able to do that.
These skills are lost. New generation of non-smokers. How can we keep these traditions alive?
These are artisanal qualities.
Exactly.
Roll me a cigarette, Dad, while you're driving.
Yep.
I used to say when I was 7.
Oh, those were the days, eh?
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah. I feel justified in my pursuit of the millennium, in my determination to not only talk with people such as yourself who are entirely agreeable and sensible, but also with people who draw knobs on things.
Yeah. Those shameful beings.
Shameful beings. Oh dear. Okay, well, let's wind that up and we'll have an off-the-record conversation which we won't share with anybody.
Yeah.
And
talk about everybody behind their back.
Yeah, we're going to talk about everybody in the audience. And
everyone.
Just like to point out that if there's anybody watching this who hasn't subscribed to the channel yet, that's really sad, because what are you going to give back to me for all of this nonsense that you've just spent your time listening to? We need to be liked. Everybody needs to be liked. Yeah. We need to be shared, though not personally, obviously. subscribe to, and like all little notifications bell. And I know that when this ends, you get a stupid voiceover of me saying all those things again. But by then you'll have switched off, won't you? That's the thing. So my friend Karen de la Carrière says, if you don't ask, you don't get. So we would very much like your support. And we'll leave it at that. I'm John Atack. This is my great good friend, Eddie Stratton. And we love you all very much. Well, actually, we don't, but we are friendly towards everyone. You know? Thanks a lot.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
We love you all very much.